everybody, welcome back. So our first season of RV camping has ended, and I figured I'd take a few minutes to do a recap of in totality what our travel was like. So I took the opportunity to put together an Excel spreadsheet because that's how my brain works, and it's always nice to have a overview of everything that happened. So in it, there's a few things that I'm tracking to. First is how many miles do we actually tow for the season, how much gas cost that equated to, that I've been tracking to, campgrounds that we stayed at, how many nights we stayed at campgrounds, and then the corresponding cost in total that we spent staying at places. The main thing I wanted to capture is more so about the core costs of this kind of traveling, mainly being gas and the stay. And then I want to do a quick comparison between how we've traveled this year and what that would have equated to if we had done it the traditional way, meaning book a flight, maybe rent a car, and then staying at a hotel. Okay, so here is the chart. We'll start up top and we'll look at like our first trip, Apple Valley, Minnesota. That was our shakedown trip. We towed roughly 38 miles, and that equated to around $7 in gas cost. We stayed at Lebanon Hills Regional Park, and if you're new to the channel, you could go check out the video up top. I'll link it. But that was our first trip, our shakedown trip, and it was our first time setting up in the rain and all the trials and tribulations that came with that. So we stayed at the park for 3 nights, and the total cost there was $134. Our second trip, as we got farther and farther away, was our weekend up at Salt Lake, where we had a campsite that was right on Salt Lake itself. We had our friends that brought their pontoon, and it was 2 days on the water. We did some fishing, and we stayed at Sinclair Lewis Campground, and that was also for us another 3-night stay. And that park, that campground, it was actually pretty cheap at like $30 some odd a night. It was electric and water. I don't know if they have full hookups, but I think they do, and they weren't just weren't available by the time we were looking. But for $30 for water and electric per night was really good. The next trip was Spring Green, Wisconsin. And that was our trip to House on the Rock, and then we also did a quick stop by Wisconsin Dells. And again, our travels are getting farther and farther at this point. We stayed at Fox Hill RV Park and Campground. Our site was good. I don't know if we'll stay there again. There wasn't a lot of public utilities available, so you really had to be self-contained. Again, we stayed there 3 nights, and this time it was a bit more expensive. You're averaging around like $60 some odd a night. And then I did a long weekend by myself at Sioux Falls, and to just go see it because I've never been there. But also the main feature that I wanted to go see was Falls Park, which I was able to do. It was also ridiculously hot that weekend. That weekend was also when Comet Neowise was flying by, so I think I saw it. I'm pretty sure I saw it. But if you want to go see it, that video I will link to. I stayed at Tower Campground, but I had full hookups, everything was level, and it was relatively affordable, so it was pretty good. Then I did another long weekend down in Iowa, and again, simply because I've never been to Iowa, so I wanted to go take a look. I kind of drove basically all over Iowa, but I went and saw just the Roseman Covered Bridge from Bridges of Madison County, went to a place called Snake Alley, and then went to the Iowa 80 truck stop, which is the world's largest truck stop. So if you're curious, I'll link that too. Timberline Campground was pretty good though. They had some pretty modern restroom facilities. It looked like it was just renovated, so recommend that particular area. And I had a campsite that was facing a pond that was on the campground, so it was a great view every morning. Then in August, we did our first long trip, which is Michigan. So you'll see here, total mileage towed, it was around 1,300 miles, corresponding gas costs. And then here are all the campgrounds that we stayed at. Big Bear and Manistee Lakeshore campgrounds. Both of those are on, like literally either on or across the way from, Big Bear was across the way from Lake Superior. Manistee Lakeshore campground was right on Lake Michigan. And then we went to Traverse City and stayed at the Timber Ridge RV Resort. And then on our way home from Traverse City, we had an overnight stay at Madison KOA, which also was pretty good. So total nights that we spent camping or staying at a campground was 9 nights, and that came in at around $500 for that particular trip. Coming off of Michigan, I had an opportunity to bring my brother-in-law and his 2 kids up to Bemidji. For the 2 kids, it was their first time camping, so that was pretty exciting. And also found really cheap rates because at this point, we were getting there September. So the rates were starting to come down, especially as you get further north into Minnesota because it's starting to get cool. So we found some really good rates for 2 nights, again, like around $30. The consistency around KOAs really gives you a sense of comfort because you know what you're gonna get always. So I have another video about it, but the KOA there was really good as well. And then the last trip was another 9-day trip to Pennsylvania and Maryland. If you're new to the channel, this trip was for me to go visit my folks out in Jersey, but I didn't want to go into Jersey because they had Minnesota on travel restrictions due to COVID. So I ended up staying in Pennsylvania outside of Philadelphia. We met up down in College Park, Maryland for a couple of days because my sister lives down there. And so it was just a week of being able to visit with family. I also worked a couple of days out there. So in total, just in towing, we towed about 5,931 miles. Total that we spent on gas, let's just call it $1,200. Total of 35 nights spent elsewhere. We'll just say that. And total spent on camping, including the cost that you just have to sacrifice when you ditch a campground. So I counted that in here too, around $1,900. So you'll see here that in total, we spent about $3,100 on our travels away from home throughout the summer. So let's take a look at what the cost would have been if we had to book flights, rent a car, and get a hotel somewhere. So let's just take a look at the numbers. So the 3 main costs that I pulled are flight, car rental, and hotel. And I'll pop it up here. But if you look at very specifically a median or average flight cost that comes out of Minneapolis St. Paul International Airport, which is our home airport, that as of 2019 is around $367 per person, per flight, and that's domestic flight. On top of that, if we get somewhere and we want to rent a car, the average car rental cost per day, and that's taking an average from some of the airport costs that I've seen, looks to be around $65 to $70 per day. And that includes, typically when you see the rates, you're like, ooh, it's cheap, and then they tack on all the taxes, you're like, holy crap, it doubled. So the $65 to $70, that includes all the fees that end up going on, and then whether or not you get insurance, that's kind of up to you. And then as far as hotels concerned, I just looked up like average daily rate for hotels, current as of August 2020, and it's at $102 per night, which is actually down roughly 20-25% from where it was in 2019. No doubt that COVID had a lot to do with that. So anyway, if I apply those to like a standard week-long trip, I have it listed here. You'll see that with the domestic flight, we're looking at around $734. If I look at car rental, I'm looking at $455. If I get insurance, maybe add another $100 to that. And then for hotel, you know, that 102, and then depending on what kind of room you actually want to get, you know, that adds up to around $700 on average. So total just core travel costs for that week would have been $1,900 or around that. And then just some other considerations. One other consideration for us is like, do we travel with the pets? The good thing about having the RV is that we've been able to bring all the pets along. If we didn't, and we've traveled like that in the past, we looked at Rover for pet sitting, and that ended up being, for a week-long trip, would be around $470. So you add that onto the $1,900, and that gets us to around $2,400. Whereas our budget or our total spend for 35 nights of being away in the RV was roughly $3,000 or $3,100 if I round up. So anyway, I think that's just an example of what I had wanted to look at to do a comparison between a season of RVing, what the costs were compared to what it would have been if we did it, you know, the traditional way. Flying, car rental, and hotel. I'm pretty sure there are other things that I haven't taken into account, but this is just a overall, like a high-level summary of stuff that I would have considered as part of our travels. And I'm sure your situation is going to differ, but hopefully this will give you some kind of a reference point, and it'll also change depending on where you are, right? So anyway, gonna keep this one short, and we'll see you in the next video.